Castlevania Judgment is a strange little experiment. Released for the original Nintendo Wii in 2008, this is a game that you either thought was a good idea or just plain ill-conceived. In any case, the most objective viewpoint that could be given to Judgment is that it's a one-on-one fighting game featuring a multitude of characters from the Castlevania franchise, all of whom have been given complete makeovers by Death Note artist Takeshi Obata, I think. Sorry if I mispronounced his name. Okay, that concludes the objective viewpoint of this review. Let's dwell into the completely subjective portion of this video. I hate these character models. Hate them. Hate them. Hate them. Hate every single living little thing about them. These people look less like a cast of Castlevania Legends and more like a cast of some cheesy Japanese softcore porno game, but without any of the so-called qualities that such a cast would possess. I guess. I don't know. Is Death Note supposed to be a hentai or something? No, don't answer that. I honestly don't care. This is absolutely atrocious looking characters. Yeah, the female characters are somewhat provocative if you're into that sort of thing, but Jesus Christ, these designs suck! They all suck! You know what I think? I think this started off as some other fighting game with a bunch of Death Note-like looking characters, and somewhere along the way, Konami thought, yeah, let's just slap the Castlevania brand on there and give everyone familiar names, and let's add a couple whip moves or something. Good lord, I know I'm going about this longer than I should, but for Ralph's sake, the character designs are horrendous. Absolutely shit. I needed that. Yeah, I needed that. So setting aside my apparent disdain for these character designs, you're probably wondering what I think of the rest of the game. A game built around the thin premise of all these various vampire killing folks brought together by some guy named Aeon to fight the Time Eater in Mortal Kombat. I don't know. The story never really made sense to me and I never bothered to try and digest the damn thing. Only thing that comes to mind is Castlevania All-Stars in Time. Because apparently Castlevania in space wasn't a good idea to base a game on. I honestly beg to differ in that regard, but on the other hand, considering producer Igarashi's tendency to rehash and repackage the same game he made back in 1997 countless times over, I sincerely doubt he would have done to the concept any semblance of justice. Now, because this is on the Wii, there are several means of control in this game. You could use your Wii Remote and Nunchuck combo, or you could settle for a Classic Controller / Classic Controller Pro, or the Nintendo GameCube controller. You could choose from a number of controller schemes per setup. For the most part, I just stick with the Classic Controller setup, because without this feature, I probably would not have bothered picking this game up despite bearing the Castlevania name. Although I did try the Wii Remote Nunchuck combo, and ended up waggling about doing whatever. It works fine, but I prefer the old school means, if you will. In either case, I don't think it makes much of a difference other than your wrist's level of activity. So the fighting in Castlevania Judgment places both fighters in a free-roaming arena, meaning you can move in all 8 directions as opposed to being restricted to a 2D plane with some limited 3D movement. Each character has a series of basic special moves and a super move that can inflict maximum damage on their opponents. In addition to these, you can destroy various bits of the arena to pick up parts and sub-weapons to use against your foes, comprising the classic sub-weapons such as cross boomerangs and holy water, but certain characters also have access to other sub-weapons as well. The fighting engine itself is somewhat of a mixed bag. You have a series of special moves and a super move of sorts. You can use sub-weapons and other things, but it's all just unnecessary fluff for what's essentially a waggle game, or if you're using a classic controller, a button masher. I think we were trying to go for a Smash Brothers version of a traditionalist fighting game system, and while it works okay for the most part, it just flows flat overall. In regards to the remote nunchuck setup, you're really just wagging your wrist about just to perform a quick combo, occasionally pressing another button or two to perform special attacks. On the classic controller, you're more inclined to learn some of the special moves, which are quite frankly usually easy to pull off. Most of it involves feverishly mashing a couple buttons aimlessly. In fact, despite the presence of a helpful move list, you can pretty much mash buttons to your heart's content like a complete fucking idiot, and you'll manage to blow through the entire moveset quite easily. And when you have a fully charged meter, all it takes is one button. one button to execute your super duper special move, which is usually just a trigger move that, unless it's blocked or whiffed, will cut to a long and drawn out cinematic that has no place in a fighting game. But hey, at least it cuts your opponent's health in half and you manage a 99 hit combo or something equally ridiculous. As far as control goes, it works well enough, I suppose. Like I said, there's multiple control schemes you could go with, and they work well enough to get what you need out of them. You could use the Wii Remote and Nunchuck to waggle about and pull off some moves. You can mash buttons on the classic controller or GameCube controller to perform moves. Not much else to it. Mapping can be swapped around for different configurations, but I was more than satisfied with the default setup. I do wish there was a better locking mechanism in place so that my character isn't just aimlessly attacking dead air. That is where my target is not waiting. But that's an uncommon thing. So let's blow through all these modes in Castlevania Judgment. You have story mode, where you can play through the game's convoluted story that serves as the reason why all these different characters from different points in time are fighting each other. At first you can only play as either Simon Belmont or Alucard, but completing their stories will unlock other characters, and you just repeat the whole process with the rest of the cast ad nauseum until you get all the soul keys and you could fight the Time Reaper or whatever it's called. Arcade mode is your standard arcade mode. You pick a character, you go through everybody else. Castle mode is where you roam around a castle through a map function and you complete various challenges, whether it be beating an opponent in a time limit or with certain restrictions applied. You have your usual training mode and other things where you can link up with a Nintendo DS that's supposed to unlock more stuff. And for those who care, you could go online and face off against other players. I test this feature, but it seems that as of February 2014, which is when this footage was recorded, nobody in their right mind was playing this game. Of course, by the time you're watching this review and when it's eventually uploaded, online multiplayer on the original Wii will be nothing more than a distant memory. And when it comes to Castlevania Judgment, nothing of value would have been lost. I've already expressed my utter contempt and hatred over the various character models, god damn it, so I'm really not going to dwell further on that aspect. But Castlevania Judgment as a whole looks rather subpar, despite the Wii's graphical prowess being only slightly above that of a PlayStation 2. Judgment looks like a game that could have easily been released on the Sega Dreamcast, minus the obvious waggling of course, and even within that context it still looks rather mediocre. The various backdrops are passable at best, but that's about the only real positive in this regard. Oh, and there's not much in terms of clipping or broken polygons or anything of the sort. It's technically sound for all it's worth, but it just looks, I don't know, cheap. As if it's missing a bit of polish or proper camera controls, quite frankly. And then there's the super attacks, these long, drawn-out, boring, insomnia-curing cinematics disguised as super attacks. My god, this is taking forever. Why is this taking forever? Oh god. Be over. Suddenly, I'm longing for the 10 tedious seconds day-to-night transitions of Simon's Quest. In fact, you know what? Let's have some fun and compare the two. I'm never going to complain about day-to-night transitions again. Your soundtrack in Castlevania Judgment is comprised mostly of rehashed tunes of Castlevania past. You know, your usual Vampire Killer, your Bloody Tears, that sort of thing. They're all competently done and all, and probably would have fit a much better Castlevania game if one existed. Sound effects are sort of just there, adequate at best. Unfortunately, to go along with the shitty character designs, you also apparently had to have shitty voice acting, and Judgment has its fair share of unemotive voiceovers delivering embarrassing lines of dialogue and in-game taunts and bits that overstay their welcome 10 seconds into the first match. Not to mention some of these backstories are somewhat ridiculous and contribute to the terrible bits of dialogue. The Golem wants to be human. Maria is obsessed with breasts. The Japanese voiceovers fare a bit better in that it seems more energetic, but that really isn't saying much. On a whole, this whole thing really does feel like a throwback to the early PlayStation 1 era, where they were just starting to add voiceovers in video games and most of it was just god fucking awful. It's a particular aspect of video games that did not need to be revisited in any semblance. Sad. Castlevania Judgment is, for all intents and purposes, a throwaway title that Konami was somehow convinced people would fork over the $60 to pick up and play, but somewhere along the way they forgot to give players a reason to care about giving this game more than a half-hour play time. A Castlevania fighting game is already a hard enough sell that might turn off a few people, if not more, but it could have been, at the very least, a decent little curiosity if done right. What ends up on screen is a game with putrid character designs and overtly simplistic fighting engine that is more style over substance, and even that's a bit of a stretch. It just has that overall feeling of being just another lazy shovelware title that seems to permeate the Wii library. Sure, the soundtrack is of decent quality, there's a good chunk of unlockable content to sort through, and there's a sizable number of game modes to fiddle around with, but none of that matters when the core game itself is just worthless drivel. If you really need your vampire killing fix on the original Wii, your best bet would be to download any of the Castlevania games available on the Wii Virtual Console service while it's still there. Hell, I'll go one better and recommend you check out Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth on the WiiWare service while it's still there, which is a short but otherwise superb little game. As for Judgment, unless you're looking to fill the void in your Castlevania or fighting game collection, I really wouldn't bother with this one. It's not that interesting, it's not that good, and quite frankly, it's really, really pointless.
They're huge.